Hey everybody, this is Dr. Hathcock giving you the second part of the 1920s lecture. Continuing on with that theme of change. Change is kind of the big word to describe the decade of the 1920s. There's a lot of change coming for African Americans in this decade. A lot of it is positive. And a big part of this is the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem being one of the sections of New York City. Harlem was one of those big self-help communities in New York in the 1920s. And what happened with the Harlem Renaissance was this huge outpouring of African American culture, pride, art, music, literature, you name it. The Harlem Renaissance really was this expression of African American culture. And in many ways, African American culture became becoming mainstream, something popular, I guess you could say, in America. But for starters, Langston Hughes, if you look on our slide, the top right hand side there, Langston Hughes was a literary figure. He was a writer. He wrote novels, plays, poems. His art tended to stress love, kindness, compassion, empathy, but also pride as a people. And Langston Hughes is kind of seen as like the figure of the Harlem Renaissance, the literary figure for sure. But honestly, if people are talking about this decade 100 years from now in history classes, it's going to be about the music. Blues, jazz really was the music of that age. I'll start with blues first and then make my way over to jazz. But blues as a musical expression goes like all the way back to the plantations, all the way back to the age of slavery. I say this a lot in class, but it was illegal for African Americans to have an education. They weren't able to read or write. So they really weren't able to sort of give a written history of their who they are, where they came from, who their parents were, and things like that. So, yeah, without that, what many slaves turned to was sort of a musical expression. Sort of a song that say, "This is who I am. These were my parents. This is our history. These are the things that we've gone through." And so, yeah, the blues was this musical expression that starts out in the age of slavery, songs of heartache, sorrow, loss. And then in the 1920s, the big change is you can record sound. And once you can record sound, then you can lay these songs down on a track. You can go buy the album, it gets played on the radio. And blues as a musical expression just takes off big here in the 1920s. But honestly, this was the jazz age. If you'd have been alive at the time, if you were going to a party, more than likely the music at the party would have been jazz. If you went to a speakeasy to get some bootleg whiskey or something like that, uh, probably they'd have been playing jazz at that speakeasy. This is the jazz age in a really big way. Jazz as an art form really takes off across the country. Starts in New Orleans, but then makes its way up the Mississippi and goes to places like Chicago, ends up Kansas City, goes into Chicago. Once it gets into New York, that's it. It's over. It explodes all across the country. And on the bottom right, you can see the Cotton Club was like the big club there located in Harlem, where a lot of jazz performers played. If I go over to the far left bottom of our slide, you can see Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, two major jazz musicians of their time. You look at a guy like Louis Armstrong, for example, really a tremendous musician who made a living in the New Orleans night scene. I mean, he played nightclubs, he had enough money to survive. But then, once jazz takes off and you can record sound on a record, he is famous. He tours the country. His albums sell, and he's duly compensated for the talent that he has. And what a lot of these jazz artists figured out in the 20s are things that'll be happening later in the decades to come. You go on tour, you go across the United States and you play shows. And while you're playing your shows, you promote your album. So album sales go up. So like stuff like making an album, going on tour, things that bands and future generations would be doing. These guys in the 1920s were sort of writing the rules of going on tour, making an album, promoting an album, and things like that. And in looking at the double standard of the age, Sadly, Jim Crow was still very much alive in America. Segregation was still there. And the double standard is that it's okay that the artists are African American, but out there on the dance floor, it's going to be all white as the crowd is segregated. You look on the bottom right of the slide, you can see the band up on stage. These are African American artists, and that's perfectly acceptable to a business owner. But out there on the dance floor, we're not going to mix the races. We're going to have segregation out there on the dance floor. And I've always said that these young people of the 1920s, they sort of recognize the hypocrisy and the double standard of that age. Look, they grew up liking Louis Armstrong. They liked his music, his talent, his albums. They become full-fledged adults, leaders of the country, like during and after World War II, and they're going to lead that charge against dismantling segregation and Jim Crow as we go forward. So, the music of that generation, the jazz age and jazz music itself, really does play a role in sort of changing hearts and minds and perceptions on things like race, Jim Crow, segregation going forward. Okay, looking at the politics of the 1920s, it's all Republican all the time. The country had gone through the Wilson era, gone through the progressive age in World War One, and now as the 1920s emerge and the war is over with, Americans just want to go back to enjoying an era of peace and prosperity. And conservative values are back as the Republican Party begins to win a lot of these elections of the 1920s. All the presidents in the 1920s are going to be Republican, starting with Harding, going to Coolidge, going to Hoover. And this Republican Party of the 1920s is very friendly to business. They will bend over backwards to help grow the economy and help business have success. And so we'll start with the Harding administration. And I already set up Harding in the previous lecture about, for better or worse, he represents America in the 1920s. And in trying to be as kind as I can be to Warren Harding, the presidency was just, I think, in so many ways too much for him. He admitted as much to his wife that he was at times in over his head. I don't know, still trying to be nice. When we look back on presidents of the United States, he doesn't really rank as one of our better ones. In fact, if I'm being very honest with you, he ranks as one of our worst presidents. But a lot of it really is the people he put into his administration, his advisors, really more than it is him himself. We call them the Ohio Gang. Most of his appointees to positions of power were from Ohio. They were friends of his, associates, people he knew. And the so-called Ohio Gang, these people were corrupt, blackmail, extortion, bribery, all kinds of things like that. They use their positions of power to line their own pockets and get what they want. So yeah, there's a lot of scandals that break out in the Harding administration. Now I'm going to talk about the Teapot Dome scandal as sort of the example of the scandal of the age. But I've always told my students, you need to understand this is the big one. But there were other scandals breaking out at the same time. Like other parts of this administration were involved in all kinds of unscrupulous activities as well. Also, I've always said this, the Teapot Dome scandal was, for a long stretch of American history, considered to be the worst thing that government officials had ever been involved in American history, up until Watergate. Watergate in the Richard Nixon administration kind of still holds the stamp as like the worst thing that government officials have ever done. But the Teapot Dome scandal is way up there as far as a scandal in American political history. Okay, looking at the top right-hand side of our slide here, there's a picture of a gentleman there named Albert Fall. Albert Fall was the Secretary of the Interior for President Harding. We have something called the Interior Department. It looks after our national parks and our public lands. So Albert Fall, as Secretary of the Interior, he heads up our public lands. Well, there was some public land in Wyoming where oil was discovered. And it's kind of a really silly reason for the name. We call it the Teapot Dome scandal because there was a rock formation on that land where the oil was discovered. The rock formation looked like a teapot with its dome or its lid on top. Again, a really weird reason for the name. I would have called it the Albert Falls scandal if I could have named these things, but I can't. So we call it the Teapot Dome scandal because of a rock formation on the land up there in Wyoming. Anywho, there's oil in that land in Wyoming. Oil companies are chomping at the bit to get up there, drill away, get at that oil. But it is federally protected land. So these oil companies go to Secretary of the Interior Fall, President Harding, and they're asking to open up that land for drilling. It'll help the economy. It'll create jobs. Uh, the uh, the administration is very friendly to that idea. The Republicans in Congress want to help create jobs and grow the economy too. So Albert Fall did the right thing in working with Congress to get those protections on the land repealed, and oil companies would then at that point be allowed to go in and start drilling on the land. So to that point, the law was being followed. Nothing criminal had taken place. But then in the next steps, Fall did begin to break the law. Only companies that got contracts from the government would be allowed to drill on that land up there in Wyoming. So you had to get a contract from the United States government to get the right to drill on that land. So Fall, in awarding these government contracts, he would only give contracts to those oil companies that paid him a little bit on the side. Call it a bribe, extortion, corruption, whatever you want to call it. But Albert Fall was personally profiting off of these government contracts that he was rewarding. It's been estimated he made something like $500,000 in 1920s money on the side in awarding those government contracts. All right, so he's involved in this. It's fraud. Um, it's bribery. It's extortion. He's making money on the side. And those muckraker journalists of the progressive era are still around. They're still good at their job. They still know how to investigate. They still know how to uncover truths. So those muckraker journalists begin to smell something here. They go after it. They investigate it. And they're starting to track down that some corruption is taking place. It's pretty obvious that Albert Fall is making money off of this personally. And the question in, say, the late spring of 1923 is, does the president know about this? And is the president possibly making money off of this as well? So the media at a point, they had Albert Fall dead to rights. I mean, they had people willing to talk to the newspapers, people, giving all this information up. So it's very obvious that, the government was awarding contracts through bribery and extortion. It's also pretty evident that Albert Fall was a part of that. But the only remaining question was, to what extent did President Harding have anything to do with it? Well, when history looks back on all this, we can pretty much say that Harding really didn't know. Harding didn't know that this was happening. We know for a fact he wasn't personally profiting. And in so many ways, Harding was really caught off guard by this whole thing. He, honest to God, didn't know. But I think the newspapers at the time made a valid point. They said, look, either the president knows, and that means he's corrupt, he's a part of it. And if he doesn't know, that means he's kind of incompetent and he's not really running this country the way he should. To be called incompetent or a criminal, neither one of those things are good for a president. But this thing, it's starting to play out in the press. The American people are starting to ask some tough questions as well. And at some point, Harding has a sit down with Fall and says, look, just what's happening here? Tell me the truth. And story goes that Albert Fall started crying, broke up, confessed everything to the president, the bribery, the extortion, the whole thing. And the right thing for President Harding to do in that moment would have been to fire Albert Fall, hold a press conference, and say to the world, I just found out about this. He's been fired. I'm going to work with the Attorney General and the Justice Department to see to it that that he's prosecuted and he goes to jail. That would have been the right move for President Harding to make. But instead, President Harding sort of, wraps his arms around his friend and says, that's okay, little buddy. We're going to get through all this. And the president began to cover this up, try to lie, try to block investigations. And the president, in effect, became complicit in the Teapot Dome scandal. So, again, he did not profit off this. He really didn't know about it till Fall confessed. but then Harding becomes complicit in the cover up, and that in itself is criminal as well. And then more scandals began to unfold. More people were talking to the media. The whole thing was falling apart, and it became pretty obvious to the American people that their president uh, is either incompetent or a criminal. It also became pretty evident to the American people that the Republican Party was involved in a lot of scandals. And in the summer of 1923, the American people began to lose almost total faith in their government, and they lost a lot of faith in the Republican Party there in 1923, as well as President Harding himself. So as everything was falling all around him, and I don't know, it was all falling apart, Harding thought that'd be a great time to go on a vacation. So he took off to San Francisco to get away from everything. I don't know, maybe he really did need a vacation. He was facing a lot of problems there for sure. But he goes out to San Francisco for a little R&R, rest and relaxation. I don't know, man. He went on a cruise and watched whales jump around in the ocean. Toured San Francisco itself. But it's August of 1923. The president's in his hotel room. His wife said that she would always read to him at night before he would go to bed. It's almost like reading bedtime stories to a child. But Harding was there in bed with his wife. She was reading the newspaper. She said she would read to him. He would fall asleep. She would kiss him on the forehead, and off they'd go to bed. Well, she finished reading the newspaper. She kissed him on the forehead and found that he was a little on the cold side. She was looking for a pulse, trying to find some sign of life, and couldn't find anything. Her husband was unresponsive. She screamed at the top of her lungs. The Secret Service come charging in. And sure enough, in August of 1923, the President of the United States dies in his sleep. Some say he got the easy way out of all this, that he passed away and he was gone. Who knows what would have happened going forward? There could have been indictments, there could have been impeachments, we don't know. But there it is. August 1923, the President passes away in his sleep in his San Francisco hotel room. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, in upper state Vermont, the guy there in the middle, Mr. Calvin Coolidge, is Vice President of the United States. And he was visiting his family in Vermont. Secret Service came screeching into the driveway of his father's house. They were banging on the door at like 3 o'clock in the morning, demanding to get in. Coolidge, he thought somebody in his family had passed away. Opens the door to find out, sure enough, somebody has passed away, but it's not his family, it's the president. And right there in Calvin Coolidge's father's living room, right by the fireplace, using the family Bible, Calvin Coolidge was sworn in as the next president of the United States. So, Coolidge is in upper state Vermont, becomes president in the middle of the night. West Coast, Harding is dead. East Coast, up in the Northeast, Coolidge is secured by the Secret Service and sworn in as the next president of the United States. And Calvin Coolidge did exactly what Warren Harding should have done. Calvin Coolidge, in taking over this situation, just says, look, I got nothing to do with any of this. I got nothing to do with this Teapot Dome mess, these other scandals that are being uncovered. And Calvin Coolidge said, I'm going to cooperate with the Justice Department and the authorities. I'm going to see to it that these people who are up to no good are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And Calvin Coolidge was seen as a man who was honest, forthright, stood by the law, made certain that those people were prosecuted. And for that, what we say is Calvin Coolidge restored America's faith in government. He certainly saved the Republican Party from a total, utter collapse. And for all that, Calvin Coolidge was nominated for the presidency in 1924. He went on to very easily win the presidency in 1924. And on Calvin Coolidge's watch, the economy went to the highest of highs and money was flowing like wine. The economy was amazing. He personally, I don't know, his nickname was Silent Cal because he didn't say much. I remember reading he liked jelly beans and he really liked to take naps, like lots and lots of naps. He's a very sort of hands-off president that didn't do much. But I think the American people in his during his presidency, they enjoyed that. It was an area of peace and prosperity and economic growth, and the president wasn't really doing anything. He stayed out of the way. And I don't know, Calvin Coolidge, for the people who were alive at the time, Calvin Coolidge, in so many ways, was really seen as a good president, a guy who stood by the law and did what was right, and saw to it that people like Albert Fall were prosecuted and went to jail for the things that they had done. Well, in 1928, Calvin Coolidge decided that he would not run. He would not seek a reelection. Um, I don't know if his wife was. I don't know if his wife was kidding when she said this, but she said that he wasn't seeking a reelection because being president cut into his nap time. Um, I don't know if that's real or not, but I know that he did not seek a reelection. So in 1928, the guy on the bottom right-hand corner of our slide, Mr. Herbert Hoover, was picked by the Republican Party to be its leader going forward. And Herbert Hoover really was supposed to be one of the greatest presidents that this country has ever had. He was rich, intelligent, kind, charismatic, and caring. And people really did talk about Herbert Hoover going on to be one of the greatest presidents that our country had ever had. Herbert Hoover's thing was the economy. He was an economist. He had worked in the Treasury Department throughout the 1920s, and he really was seen as an intelligent, handsome, articulate, wealthy leader of men. Herbert Hoover, they said, was like the kind of guy when he walked into a room, he just commanded your attention. He just was a natural born leader of men. He was also a compassionate man, if I'm being honest with you. Like in 1919, at the end of World War I, there were a lot of people starving in Europe. Germany and Belgium in particular, there were a lot of people starving at the end of World War I. Herbert Hoover put together this humanitarian food drive to try to feed those starving people in Europe. And they say you can't even begin to understand how many thousands of lives that thing saved. And he went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize in 1919 for his work putting together that humanitarian food drive. So he is compassionate. He is intelligent. He really is a leader of men. In 1928, his campaign slogan was "a chicken in every pot and two cars in every garage." The saying being there will always be food cooking in the kitchen. So there'll be a chicken in every pot. You're going to have food. And we're going to be so rich that both mom and dad can have a car. So two cars in every garage. They actually said that if we could get Herbert Hoover in the White House, we would end poverty. This country would have economic success unlike any time in its history. And they're talking jobs, wealth, security, no more poverty, no more hunger. And it's tragically sad that none of those things came to pass. It's also tragically sad that this man would overwatch the worst economic crash the country had ever faced. And this guy who was supposed to understand economics like nobody else and was supposed to lead us into the greatest of days. Turns out 1928 is just a bad year to win an election. And depression was right around the corner on Herbert Hoover's watch. The depression is not Hoover's fault, but as I'll explain going forward, he really didn't do the right things to recover the country from it either. Okay, so now looking at the stock market, the market in the 1920s grew at a really good rate. I would say from the beginning of the decade through 1927, the market grew at a very nice, steady rate. Like 5% interest growth each year, nice, steady pace. And man, those market prices were based on productivity, sales. Remember, we talked about the assembly line and things like that. So the market in the 1920s was solid. It was really good, and people were getting great returns on their investments. So middle class Americans, working class folks like me and you in the 1920s, they're sitting there watching as the rich get richer, and their thinking is, hey man, I want a slice of that pie. I don't want to have to work till I'm in my 60s and 70s. So middle class, working class Americans wanted to play the market game. They wanted to get in on all this and make some money themselves. Well, you can wish and hope all you want, but having money is what gets you into the market game. So there is this desire by a lot of working class folks in America to invest. They just don't have the type of money that it takes to really fully invest. But in step the commercial banks. And the role of the commercial banks is they made it possible for Americans to take out loans to purchase stock. Now, something called credit margins. This was like easy access to loans where you'd put down, like, say, 10% cash. The rest you'd get in a loan. And you could use that type of a loan to go out and purchase stock. Of course, you got to pay it back plus interest and all that. These were very friendly loans. They were very easy to get. And as long as the market was growing, everything was fine. Everybody was happy. The banks were more than willing to lend. Americans were more than willing to take out loans. And as the market grew, steady, nice pace, strong, it was a win-win situation for everybody involved. But what the banks were doing in making those loans is they were tying themselves to the success and failure of the stock market. If you think about what a bank was, the commercial banks then and now are, it's your savings and checking accounts. You think about a bank, just imagine we're in class. We're not, obviously, but imagine if we were in class. I'd be standing in the front of the classroom. Maybe there's a table in front of me. And, I'm your bank manager, and I've got all this money up sitting on a table. It's the savings and checking accounts of everyone in the room, all of your classmates and yourself. You open up a savings and a checking account. You put your money in the bank. I'm your bank manager. I got a big old pile of cash up front on the table. Now, as the bank manager, it's my job to make that money grow. I need to make that pile get bigger. So what I do is I start lending that money out. I lend it to someone to buy a house, other people to buy cars. And yes, I'll lend out money for people to buy stock. And the idea is they'll pay me back plus interest. So my pile of money might go down for a little bit, but it'll start to build back up as the money's being paid back, and it'll grow even bigger when the interest rates start to come in as well. Well, that all works very well as long as people are paying off their loans and the interest rates are being paid and the money's coming in. But if I stop making payments on my house, the bank will repossess my house, try to sell it and get their money back. If I stop making payments on my car, the bank will repossess my car and try to get their money back. If I stop making payments on my loans for stock, the stock itself is collateral in the loan. So if I take out, I'm just trying to make the math simple here for you guys. Let's say I want to buy a share of RCA, costs $100. I put down 10% cash. The rest of it comes in a loan from RCA. And they're going to give me $90 to buy something that's worth 100. I got to pay it back plus interest and all that. As long as it's worth $100, I'll make those payments. That's a winning formula for me. In fact, if I'm lucky, it might go up to 110, 115, 120. Heck yeah, I'm going to make that payment. But God forbid, what if the market should crash? God forbid, what if this stock goes from being worth $100 to collapsing and now being worth, say, 60, and then it collapses even further and it gets all the way down to 20? That's not a winning situation for me. You lent me $90 to buy something that's worth 100. That's an amazing deal. Thumbs up all the way. But now I'm in a situation where I've borrowed $90 and I'm making payments on something that's worth 20. Yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. So people stopped paying back their loans. They just said to the bank, it's yours, man, have it. And so now the banks are being saddled with a lot of bad debt. They're being saddled with situations where instead of getting paid back their $90 plus interest, they now have a stock that's worth $20, and it's going to be very hard to sell that and try to get your money back. So my big pile of cash at the table in the front of the room as the bank manager that I'm supposed to make grow, it's actually getting smaller. Because as the market crashed and the value of stocks fell, people stopped making their payments and the banks took over the stocks, but the stocks aren't worth what they used to be. And as a result of all that, our banks are going to collapse. So if I could come back to this point and make this point very crystal clear, the role of the commercial banks was to lend out money for people to buy stocks. That tied our savings and checking accounts to the whims of the stock market. The market crashes, the stocks become worthless, people stop paying their loans, and as a result of that, banks went bankrupt. and Americans across the nation lost their savings and checking accounts as their banks collapsed. Back then, there was no FDIC. The government would not step in and save you. You just lost everything. You could have never invested a nickel in the stock market, but your bank was so heavily wrapped up in these loans for stocks that when it collapses, you also got wiped out and you lost everything in those moments. That's what made this depression so terribly bad. Is it ravaged our banks, ravaged our financial institutions, and just wiped people's savings and checking accounts out across the board. Okay, but the role of the commercial banks was to make it possible for middle class, working class Americans to purchase stock. Okay, so looking at troubling signs, and there were some troubling signs. For starters, people stopped buying things in 1927. And a recession was happening in the country. And look, hey, that's great that we can make those Model Ts better, faster, cheaper than we ever have before. But what does it matter if nobody's buying them? So Mr. Ford, Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company, he's got all these Model Ts that are built better, faster, cheaper than ever before, but nobody's buying those Model Ts. And they're beginning to pile up on the factory floor. So Mr. Ford begins to ask tough questions like, so why am I paying all these people a salary if I'm not selling any cars? So one troubling sign is warehouses are stockpiling goods and services. People aren't buying things anymore. They're not buying record players and radios and all that stuff anymore. As the economy is beginning to go into a recession, we stop buying stuff and it starts to stockpile. And because we're not buying things, that means that people are going to start losing their jobs and getting laid off. Another very troubling sign in 1927 was the market. The market to that point had been growing at a nice steady pace, but in 1927, those market prices began to shoot like a rocket to the moon. It did more. It did worry some economists, and they were trying to figure out, the heck's going on here. But what happened is people who sold stock brokers, if you will, they started selling the stock at inflated prices. They stopped selling it at the price it should have been based on, like sales and productivity and things like that. But in 1927, here come all these middle class, working class Americans with their credit margin loans. They look like suckers who don't know how to play this game or what they're doing. So they'd come in and they say, "Hey, I want to buy a piece of RCA for $100." And these stockbrokers would say, "Well, the price changed and I can't sell it for anything less than, say, $125. It is what it is. That's the price I'm going to sell it at." And that $25 jump in price is not based on sales, productivity, or anything like that. It's based on greed. It's just based on that dude trying to get away with it and see if he can get it. And the market is what people are willing to bear. These people with their credit margins shrug their shoulders and say, that's cool. I'll pay $125 because you and I know in a year it'll probably be worth $175, if not more. So stock market prices begin to go up. People stop buying products, so sales are going down. Inflation was rampant across the economy. And those troubling signs, which should have been an indicator of trouble ahead, instead people felt like, hey, the good times are rolling. It's a party. Don't be a party pooper. Enjoy these times while they're here. The 20s were like the roaring 20s. It was a party in the country. But they should have ought to know better. And in October of 1929, the market goes through a series of crashes. But the big one hit on October the 29th, 1929, a day that we refer to as Black Tuesday in American history. October the 29th, 1929, the market crashed. And in that one afternoon of trading, the market lost 40% of its total value. You look on our slide on the bottom left-hand side there, that's the scene of panic as people came running out there in the Wall Street district as the market closed. 40% drop that one afternoon of trading there in 1929. By the time by the time the collapse is over, or it bottoms out, I should say, because it ain't gonna be over for a while. But by the time the crash bottoms out, in very late 1932, the market had lost 80% of its total value at that point. So to throw some math at that, if you had RCA worth $100 at the beginning of the day on October the 29th, 1929, by the end of that day, it's worth 60. By 1932, it's worth $20, as the market lost 80% of its total value. People talk about how there were mass suicides that day. That's not true, but people did take their life over the next few years. Men lost their fortunes, and they felt like they had no other recourse. And yeah, there were suicides taking place in the aftermath of the market crash. I was reading a story about a guy who was he worked in one of those skyscrapers in New York. He ran the elevator, and his elevator was such that you could kind of look out on New York. It was like a glass type thing. And he said that, early in 1929, at first, when he was in the elevator and somebody would jump, they, come by screaming and plummet to the death. He said at first it was a very shocking thing. It was like horrible. It was terrifying. And he said by the time he got to 1932, he was so numb to it. I had seen it so many times that he was just like, yeah, there goes another jumper. Somebody else would take their life. How horrible is that, to become numb to a situation like that? So in looking at the question of how bad was it, it was to this point the worst economic collapse that our country has ever faced. Let's see, how bad was it? So I've already told you the market lost 80% of its total value. Let's see, 9,000 banks went bankrupt in a 4-year period from 29 to 33. 9,000 banks collapsed. They went bankrupt. And you got to think how many human beings, how many families got wiped out as 9,000 banks across the United States went bankrupt. And those people lost their savings and checking accounts. Let's see, in 1933, as Franklin Roosevelt was getting ready to be sworn in as our next president, in 1933, America was losing 1,000 homes a day to foreclosure in 1933. That means every day in 1933, 1,000 families were thrown out into the streets as their homes were foreclosed on. That's a lot of homeless people in America going in through 1933. The unemployment rate was anywhere from 25 to 30%. Just depends on who you want to believe. Conservative estimates have it at 25%. Others say, that's really actually more like a 30% unemployment rate. And that's tough. At least 1 in every 4 able-bodied working Americans are unemployed by 1933. I couldn't even imagine trying to live in that, trying to find work, trying to find a job. And you know what? We're not talking about like lazy bums who don't want to get a job. We're talking about people in the physical prime of their life who are more than willing to work tough jobs, but they're just not there. They can't be had because, jobs are being, people are getting laid off. People aren't buying things. The depression is setting in, and the economic collapse is just, it's wiping out work across the United States. So how bad was it? It's the worst economic collapse that our country's ever faced. Let's see, up there on the top right, we've got these 2 guys with poster board around their neck. They're in the streets of Chicago. You look at how these guys are dressed. They've got on a nice suits, nice shoes. Got a veteran of the war up there. These are family men. And throughout the 20s, they were probably out there hardworking men who brought home a paycheck to their families. But now here they are in the early on stages of the Depression, and they're reduced to walking the streets of Chicago with poster board around their necks, begging for work. There on the right, that is a scene outside of Portland, Oregon. It's kind of hard to tell, but that's what's called a shanty town. These things were also called Hoovervilles, kind of making fun of President Hoover, if you will. This guy was supposed to be a great leader of our people, goes on to be the butt of a lot of jokes. That's a Hooverville, is a town full of unemployed and homeless people living at the water's edge. Each of those little shanties that they put up would have been called a Hoover mansion. Hoover steak was if you could get your hands on a rabbit and skin it, you were eating a Hoover steak. Hoover blanket was newspapers. Homeless people will put newspaper under their shirts as a way to try to stay warm. So yeah, Hoover really became the butt of a lot of jokes in the onset of the Depression. And the Hoover administration's response to look at that, at first Hoover said it was a business cycle. He said, we're not going to do anything here, sort of a hands-off approach. Yeah, give it 3 or 4 years, the economy's going to rebound. We're going to be okay. But by 1932, Hoover realized it was more than just a business cycle. And for the life of me, a man who's an economic theorist, to have not seen all this, it's beyond me. It really, truly is. But Hoover's response in 1932, which by the way is an election year, so yeah, he's thinking he needs some votes. But when he did try to take actions to help with this situation, he tended to give money to the institutions like the businesses and the banks, and he tried to prop those things up. But I wouldn't say there was anything going directly to the American people who needed jobs, who needed work. Uh, as I've always said, Hoover, it's understandable to try to save the banks and the businesses and the institutions, but something also needed to be done directly to aid the American people as well. Okay, last thing to look at on the bottom right-hand side of this slide, there's a photograph of this lady here with these two kids. Little shy, won't look at the camera. They're hugging up to their mama. There was a photojournalist who followed families who left Oklahoma and were traveling to California looking for work. The film, the pictures are collectively called Migrant Families. I'm sorry. And this picture, usually when you have a discussion about the Great Depression, a lot of times this picture pops up. The look on this woman's face is America in the 1930s. It's a look of concern. There's a tinge of fear in there for sure. And the look on this woman's face is, how are we going to feed these kids? How are we going to get back on our feet, get in a home, get steady work? The country, in so many ways, is that woman's face in the 1930s. How are we going to get through these darkest of days? And how are we going to get back up on our feet? We'll talk about that in the next topic, which is the New Deal, and look at how the New Deal tried to recover the economy. If nothing else, it had the country headed in the right direction for sure. But honestly, ultimately, it's World War II that dragged the country out of the depths of the Great Depression.